Today on Sugar Spun Run, we'll be making homemade caramel candies. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. These caramel candies are soft and chewy and incredibly flavorful, but they're still sturdy enough that they will hold their shape when you cut them, and you can even dip them in chocolate if you'd like. Now before we begin, you're going to want to grab yourself an 8-inch square pan and line it with parchment paper. You can see I've sort of made a little bit of a sling here. This is so that once the caramel's finished cooking, I'll easily be able to lift it out of the pan and cut it. Now today's recipe is made over on the stovetop, and you will need a heavy bottomed pot. A medium-sized saucepan would work, but today I am going to be using one of my smaller Dutch ovens. The first thing you need is 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. And I also like to use a bit of brown sugar in my caramel. I stand by this. I know not everyone likes to use brown sugar, but you will need it for this recipe. You'll need a 1/2 cup of firmly packed brown sugar. We'll add 1.5 cups of evaporated milk. This is one 12-ounce can. 1.5 cups of heavy cream, 3/4 cup of light corn syrup, 1/2 cup of unsalted butter, and a teaspoon of salt. Now I also have a teaspoon of vanilla extract measured out here, but I'm not going to add that until the end. Now we'll turn our stovetop heat to medium, and we're just going to cook this, stirring frequently until the butter is melted. You will want to grab yourself a heat-proof spatula or a wooden spoon, something where the handle is not going to get hot, because if you use a metal utensil it will, and something that's great for scraping the bottom of the pan as you stir. This will help keep anything from burning to the bottom of the pot. Now, one thing I cannot stress enough is that caramel takes a lot of patience. You do not want to crank up the heat when you are cooking this, otherwise you're going to burn the sugars. It's just not going to cook properly. So you really just need to be patient. Now once the butter is melted, you're going to want to attach a candy thermometer to the pot. I love this digital thermometer. It makes it super easy. I will link to the exact one I use in the description. Now when you attach it to the pot, you want to make sure that the bottom of the thermometer is not touching the bottom of the pot. That's going to give you a false reading. Make sure it's suspended about halfway into the caramel mixture. It's not caramel yet, but you know what I mean. Now we're going to continue to cook this mixture, stirring constantly until it reaches 243 degrees Fahrenheit. Now again, I want to stress that this takes patience. I usually end up constantly stirring this for about an hour. Caramel is definitely a labor of love. So while you're cooking this, you're going to notice that your caramel starts to boil and bubble. This is totally normal. Now you do want to be careful that it doesn't bubble over the pot, which could obviously be very dangerous. If your liquid starts to get too high, turn down the heat. Hot caramel is not something that you want to mess with. You could end up with some very serious burns. I always like to keep my kids out of the kitchen when I'm making this. You may notice that around 215, 216 degrees, the caramel tends to stall a little bit. It'll seem like the temperature is just not moving. Don't turn up the heat, just be patient and keep stirring. I know that's kind of my mantra, just be patient. That's the most important thing to remember when making candy. Just be patient. As you cook, this mixture is going to thicken and it's going to turn a nice deep caramel color. Now, this video is going to be edited down to be just a couple minutes long because you don't want to watch me stirring for a full hour. But the reality is it does take about that long from start to finish to make this caramel. Now, as you get closer to 243 degrees Fahrenheit, keep an extra close eye on things. The caramel becomes thicker and it becomes a lot more likely to burn. So you want to make sure that you are scraping the sides and bottom of the pot constantly as you go. And if you notice any brown bits beginning to occur, immediately reduce your heat. All right, now once you reach temperature, we're going to immediately set up my station here, remove this from the stove, and keep stirring because you don't want this to burn. You can remove our candy thermometer. Be careful, that caramel is hot. You don't want to drip it on yourself. We'll stir in our vanilla extract. It's a teaspoon. And once that vanilla is completely combined and you have a nice uniform looking caramel, we're going to pour this into our prepared pan. This is a little bit tricky because it's such a hot, heavy pan. So we'll be careful, use our oven mitts. I'm going to spoon out the rest. You do want to move pretty quickly with this because it's going to start setting pretty fast. So I'm doing my best. We'll just smooth out the surface so it sets nicely. All right, you always need to move pretty quickly with candy, so I was a little nervous there, but we made it through. So now our caramel just needs to sit until it's solidified and cooled completely. Now for me, this typically only takes a couple of hours, but just to be safe, I usually recommend letting it sit overnight. Now, I'm not going to make you wait another day to see the cutting process, so I do have a batch of caramel that I prepared last night. Let me grab that. And thanks to the parchment paper, we can easily lift this out of the pan. And we can go ahead and cut it. Now I cut this into squares, and it should be a little bit firm, but it shouldn't be super difficult to cut. If you have any problems with your caramel sticking to the knife, just lightly grease this with a little bit of butter. Now for a finishing touch, you can add a little bit of flaky sea salt on top. I usually do this individually, just because it looks a little bit nicer if you do it one by one. Just takes a little bit more time. And that is how you make my favorite homemade caramel candy. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's recipe, and if you tried this one out, please leave me a comment and let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. That was good.